Dog started her life with a dream. A kicking pup, eyes unopened to the failing, gross world. The dream played, a disease carried from the purple, bloated sky and set into the blood, an emptying of the streets, so at twilight and dawn, unholy sound came down, settling into the cities like fog, a braying of the beast, sound carried down from the high places, shaking down to dust the fragile, withering frames of all beings, the roar that shakes the ground, reverberating, toppling the dusty towers of the construct of the self. The lamb, bleeding and scared, cornered, fangs stuck deep into the neck, and only the pup could crawl away, legs unusable, innocence laid out in front of the beast, and the dreaming pup, barely a week old, crawled, hid in a place unseen from the terror, and the beast relented, fading back into the darkness. After the dream, a good one took the tiny pup in their palms, clutched the newborn dog to the chest, and said, "Can you see it moving across the horizon? It is the new god, unkind and sick, lashing out at these cities and piling the dead on the sidewalks. You will be safe for a time." And the dog lived and grew, bringing kindness into an unkind place. Later, the world caught sick. And after the fall, the town was on fire, caught up in a flash of burning. The smoke was breathless and singed the inside of his throat. Finally, having crawled up the side of the hill, the charred man reached the crest, and tired, with no drink, slumped against the blackened trunk of a tree. He looked out at the orange flames licking the horizon, bloated clouds of smoke billowing plumes. Two men came from out a small, ashed forest on top of the hill, weeping, clinging together, and he, the dying, heard them say how glad they were to have survived. Breathing labored, he glanced at his chest, bubbled, and his skin melted like wax. The men saw him, and thinking he was diseased or cursed to have been burned, kicked him hard, his skin torn like paper, and forced him down the hill with the heel of their boots. The fools showed him no kindness other than death. He died on his way down the hill, and he was relieved. The two poets, or otherwise slobbering fools, laid down on the singed hill where the flames could not reach and put themselves down, sleeping as the heat remained below. They knew that they were trapped, as both sides of the hill were on fire, and they had no water, and they wept as if they had not just killed another. They wept and slept and held themselves together, while slowly the terror claimed them both. When the dog made her way into town, after the flames had been stopped by rain, she knew there would be no food, and she thought it foolish to even stop and look. But she saw the hill, and faintly scented two bodies untouched by flame. She ascended the burned slope, and found the man who had been kicked. She paused, sniffed the man, and found that he hadn't been innocent, and he had been rooted firm in his own construct, but he was not some diseased thing or some agent of harm. The dog thought the man who was kicked would have made a fine master. She continued up the hill, and found the two withered bodies of the fools. The stench of their sin was clear, now, petulant and gross. Who were they now? Corpses, like the rest of the town. She could smell the terror. It had made a quick feast of them, and they had lashed out against each other, kicking, screaming, gnashing, until they were consumed. The kicked man had fought for a brief flash, and was consumed, as the dog also soon would be. She walked for a few days, drinking from foul water when she could, eating detritus littered, or the charred remains indistinguishable, that fell about the roads, paths, and in the woods. It was hot during the day, so she slept, dug out a small hole, panting in her sleep. She moved at night. Ash covered her bodies, imprinted from sleeping and walking upon the husk of the earth. After walking, she found a cabin, functional, and she smelled and alive. She took another deep sniff, and the wind told her that there was a woman, a man, and a child inside. The child was close to death. The man would die within the hour, and the woman would die within the day. The dog opened the door with her nose. The man, on the floor, lifted his head, but dropped it, breathing labored and slow. He could not sustain the effort of breath, incompatible with life. The child crawled to the dog, who crouched down low to the ground, tail wagging slowly. The woman was asleep and did not notice. The man, in a fit of energy, rolled to his side. He was burned, his flesh a waxy melt, bubbling. He looked to the dog and smiled. The dog's slow tail swept, and the dog sent a message to the man. The man was a boy. Green was still in the trees, the grass, and he sat by a stream with his grandfather. His grandfather handed him a candy, and the boy took it, a caramel, and cast the line of his fishing pole out into the clear stream. On the rotten floor, the burned man closed his eyes, and his breathing stopped. The dog thought he deserved a kind death, and so she delivered one to him. The child was burned badly. The child dragged her torso across the floors, incapable of walking, debilitated by the flames. The dog knew there was no water in the cabin to drink. The child was delirious with thirst, of course, and the dog could not help in that way. The dog knew that the child would die. She had seen many children die. None of them ever deserved it, and they all died because of the petulance that came before them. This child, cursed to die of burns and thirst in a cabin, knew naught of the terror, or only had a small understanding of it, a knowledge of the shadow that moved in and slithered inside of the terror that would claim her, as claimed were all, but at least the dog could help usher the child to the gates. A few hours passed, and the child still resting on top of the dog. The child stirred, and the dog did as well, emerging from a feverish dream, the same dream that the dog had had since she was a pup. The child was going to die. The child was scared, crying for the woman, and the dog knew that the woman had died in her sleep during the few hours that had passed. So the dog sent a message to the child. The child was riding a bike, and the training wheels had just been removed. The child wobbled and fell over, skinning her arm. She cried. In an instant, the man and woman were upon her, holding her, dressing the wound. The pain ceased, and her father lifted her high into the air. She screamed in delight. Surrounded by family, the child died. The dog took a deep sniff. The trace of alive was gone from the cabin. All had been claimed. She waited for the blaze of the sun to set and moved through the scorched earth, sniffing for a trail to follow, some life. She found a trail. She followed and came upon the trail of a bad man, full of sin, dragging a sack of bodies, scraping the soot, towards a place full of gross transgressions. She followed the scent for an hour before she came across a group of tents. A loud motor rattled, brimming with sludge. She hid, black fur camouflaged in the ashy, barren bush, as the bad man emerged from a tent, zipped it up, and dripping with sweat, reeking of blood, metallic and sweet, hands painted red. He had a gun strapped to his back. He went towards the motor, pulled a man from the bowels of the human machine, and flung him into the dirt. "Where is it?" the bad man bellowed. She knew that the boy, barely called a man, did not know. She, from a distance, saw his fear and knew that he would die. The bad man stomped down on the boy's head with his boot like he was squashing a watermelon. He took to violence as if he were born for it. He cast a long, wretched shadow, and everything he touched was made worse. The dog saw the boy's light go out in an instant. The bad man climbed up on the motor and shot the gun. The dog was scared. She wanted to run, far away from the man, back across the soot, back to find someone alive. But she stayed in the dirt, centered herself, and remained. Many lives emerged from the tents, mostly bad, some scared, some good. The bad man spoke. "One of you fuckers has seen it!" He grabbed a young woman from the crowd and pulled her up. "Tell me or she dies!" The dog knew the man was going to kill the girl, one of the good. He dug in with a pocket knife and scraped across her cheek. He punched her hard in the stomach. The dog knew the girl from a dream. If the girl died, there was no hope. The dog allowed her body to tremble, allowed herself to whimper quietly once. After the tremble, she gathered herself from the mind killer and leapt from the bush. The people had no guns. They did not even see the dog until she had reached the side of the motor, and the dog heard one gasp, and she leapt upon the side, fangs bared, a flash of fear in the bad man's eyes, as the dog latched her teeth into the side of his face, scraping his skin like a chisel, down to the bone, eye dangling. The man screamed, the girl ran, and the people rushed to help. The dog ran after the girl, unnoticed. She followed the tracks of the girl. Wind had swept ash over her tracks, stifling out the scent. But the dog kept the course. It was hot, as it always was, but the sun was beginning to fall into the sky. The dog knew that the girl would have to fall asleep soon. The dog kept the trail. The girl fell into a dream. 1,000 people pushing up against a fence, falling, crushed by the piling on the other, lungs caved and crushed. The girl, the black of night, the small clearing in the bare pines. It was cold, and she shivered. She gave up many things to live in the camp with the bad man. She was a victim of him, as were the rest of them, and they kept each other. They clung to bodies. They kept each other from the sickness, but they could not keep themselves from dying when the bad man wanted to kill. She sat up against the tree, weak. She saw the eyes of the dog, and thought she would die from the sinking of the fangs. The wolves of the forest craved the flesh, but the dog did not. The dog wanted only to help, and the girl was too weak to run. As the dog entered into the pale light of the moon, the girl saw that she was no wolf, and then saw the blood of the bad man caked upon the dog's fur. As the girl sat, her breath felt like a stone down on the chest, labored thoughts, taking wild turns, pangs of sadness cut into the skin, thoughts frantic, wherever the brain skips, wherever there is panic, wherever the friend dies, wherever the life goes when the spirit sinks. Where she was when the boy died, when she could not know how much life was left, how much life is left, how tight can the chest constrict. The dog put her head in the girl's lap. The panic subsided into a dull throb. The girl was near death, but perhaps they could make it across the burnt fields, heading towards the dream. But that thought was only a sickly sweet distraction. There beside the trees, no dreams, only gasping awake, no stomach unturned by guilt, no sleeping soundly, not to be absolved, a thing to be carried. And what did the dog carry? The weight of the festering past. In the cursed past, the world had just burst into flames. Cities taken by sweeping hot winds, building like a heart attack of the world, bringing all into death. The dog had a master, a man and a woman, and 2 children. Many were dying, piled up in the streets, oozing petulance from their bloated bodies. The man and his family took quickly to the woods, the last places untouched by the flames. The flames crept closer. The terror crouched low and stalked. First to die was the child, a girl full of life. The man tightened his heart. He became cruel and lashing, hurting. Once the child, the boy, was crying, and the man slapped him hard across the face. He had hit the woman and the dog, but he hit the woman, the dog, and he kept them alive, away from the fires that were racing across the horizon. Cruelness took the man. Hunger pangs led him to a stranglehold of the boy's neck, madness, rage, and hatred. The dog tried to bite him, tried to free the boy, but the man kicked the dog in her teeth and knocked her into a deep sleep. In her dream, she spoke to the man. "You will fight it. You say that you have not yet been defeated," she said. "You say you will remain here. You say no act will uproot your soul. But I have been watching you. I have not left you, and I have tried to help you. It has not been easy, and many times I have felt the terror race across the same sky. You lied to yourself. You lied to everyone. You merely thrashed against the terror. You have only glimpsed it. Many have tried to help you, but you lashed out against us. You let the terror transform you into that which you said you would defeat. You are weak. You have already lost. I'm sorry. I will have to leave you. The terror will come, and you will be destroyed." When the dog woke, there was no trace of alive, The man had eaten his son, killed the woman, and the dog, facing for the first time a death, marked her prey. The bad man. She had followed him for many years, waiting. And that was the past that the dog carried. Now, the girl awoke in the heat of the morning to the sound of a motor rumbling and sputtering. She tried to jump awake, but was weak from thirst, and fell back beside the tree. The dog woke, boots scraping across the ash towards them. She could smell the dry blood on his cheek, his shirt, even his boots. He could hear his eyeball slap against the bone of his eye socket. The dog heard the gun load. The dog leapt up towards the bad man, fangs again bared towards her old master. He fired as her teeth sank into his skull and crushed down to the bone, ripping off the side of his face. The dog caught the bullet in her side, and she bled, her blood letting out the matted fur of her body, mixing with his as they slowly faded into death. They were on the porch. It was a summer day. Cicada songs sang out. He threw the ball for her. She stopped, turned to him, his face half gone, and she asked, "How swift does a promise disappear when faced with the terror?" And he replied, "Well, I promised to protect you. I promised to be strong and pure and told you I would defeat the primal destruction brewing inside of me. I lost. Now it is the final hour. I was destroyed long ago, but now it is my final hour, and I too will be destroyed. It is the weight of your transgressions that brings this ending. It did not have to be like this, cursed and crushed," said the dog. And the man turned to his family, his girl, her head smashed in, his boy ripped apart and consumed, his wife. "I have spent my days surrounded by decadence. I have lived always for myself, and I have sacrificed little. It is too late for me, this heaping pile of gross sin, this bag of flesh and petulance. Maybe you could take a final ride out, run against the bloated wind sweeping across the horizon, run against the pull of pain that drew me into this life of anger and fear. You will not make it. You will be claimed. But you can try. You can be better than I was." "How convenient. What a kind ending for you," said the dog. "You who stomped out the bright lights of so many. You who let yourself become so bloated and gross with sin. You get no quarter, even in death." The child, cave-faced, leapt with unholy speed and took a chunk of skin from the man's neck. The mother smashed, ripped apart the tendons in his ankle as if they were paper. The boy placed a stone on the chest of the man, stone on chest, stone, gasping, his eyes filling with fear, fighting for breath, limp and flailing. Another stone, crushing, his innards splayed out like a pop balloon. A final terror etched into his soul. He died. The girl cradled the dog and tried in vain to stop the blood with a scrap of cloth. The dog opened one eye. The dog had been many places. She had seen many things, and she had ushered many people into death, people who did not deserve to die. And the dog knew that she did not deserve death. But as the weeping girl cradled her, the dog knew that at least her terror would be fast, as swift as destruction could be. No stone upon the chest, only swift consumption, and the dog would not be alone for death. The dog faded, the before times. She jumped off a dock and caught a frisbee in midair, plunging into the cool, untampered water. The girl laughed from the dock. The dog died. The bad man's car was still running. Flies were already feasting on his corpse. The girl remembered how to drive. She hoisted herself into the jeep, still weeping, salt prickling the open sores on her face. She opened the center console and drank water. There was enough stolen and piled water in the back of the jeep to last for a few days' trip, and enough food for a journey. She drove back to the village and told them that the bad man was dead. They piled in the jeep and started towards the sea. It wasn't a long journey, and when they reached the sea, it was a cool breeze, the first time any of their faces felt anything but fire for years. They built a village and survived for a while. The fish of the sea were not dead. When the high water and the hurricanes came, some died every year, and some died, and some were born, and some died. Humans are chained by the terror. Even the fearless, in the final moments, wither up